I thought I would take advantage of my age. I'm 75, almost 76, and share with you some of the things crazy things that happen in a normal lifetime. You run into barriers that you never expect, and you kind of have to decide, are you going to accept it, or are you going to tackle it head on? Now, who was I? I was a girl, grew up in a nice waspy family in Connecticut, in Groton, Connecticut, and I was a tomboy. I loved to run. I mean, I was perfectly happy to wear my church clothes, and I liked sugar and spice and everything nice, but I also liked snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, and with 4 brothers, I played baseball and hockey and football and basketball, anything, and my best friend and I, we just loved a challenge, and so we got it in our heads that we were going to canoe to school. So we did. Well, we took off our shoes and ran in the snow barefoot. Don't ask me why, but it was a challenge. And that's who I was. Now, if you want to know who my parents thought I was and what their goals were for me, you just look at the family names. My brothers all had these elegant waspy names. James Morrison Chase and Charles Folk Chase and Peter Reeves Chase. And I suddenly realized maybe at age 6 that I was just Julia. So I asked my mother, how come I didn't get a middle name? And she said, oh, and she said this in all seriousness, you're a girl. Girls have to earn their own third name. So that was their goal, that I would grow up, I'd be moderately educated, I'd be pretty, charming, and catch myself a good, rich husband. Those weren't my dreams. Even at 7 years old, I had my own dreams. I wanted to go out in the jungle and catch wild animals like William Beebe, who was the equivalent of Jane Goodall, somebody who went out into the wilderness and had adventures. Or another dream when I was 7, I guess, would have been to run like a gazelle through the forests and fields, run cross country, I'd heard about that. Run the Boston Marathon, I'd heard about that. And I actually grew up in a town with a number of famous marathoners, Johnny Kelly, Amby Burfoot. And I loved to run. When I was 6 years old, if you missed the bus, my mother, of course, didn't know how to drive, so if you missed the bus, you ran 1.5 miles to school. And that was fun. That was a great way to start the day. Now, in the era that I was growing up, there was very significant gender discrimination. And it set in when you hit puberty. In the United States back then, there was actually a ban on women running anything more than 220 meters that started in 1928 to 1958. You could actually be banned from all sport if you ran any farther than 220 meters, which was like, huh, anybody can do that. And in high school, I began running 800-meter track and was the New England champion and had all these great fellow runners that were friends, and we went to all these crazy races around New England. And in 1960, I had just run in the Olympic trials, and all my teammates and I showed up in Manchester, Connecticut, and went to the starting line to run this 5-mile race. And all of a sudden, the officials got there and got in my face and actually pushed me off the road. And that's when I learned that this was forbidden. So then we went on a campaign, and the media actually got very involved, and the more they played with it, the bigger the story became. And for about 6 weeks, I was viral throughout the world and getting letters from strangers in South Africa encouraging me, Japan. But it was probably the loneliest period in my life because the press was saying, women don't run, you're a woman, you're running, what are you? I decided I had to do it. We had all grown up with the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on the bus was only 10 years before, and I knew that I simply had to go and defy the barrier, which I did. And there had been so much publicity that 2 other women showed up the same day, and the 3 of us ran, and to make a long story short, we actually won. They didn't ban me, and they did, within 3 months, agree to cross country for women. So that was my first experience with one of life's speed bumps, a barrier that was tossed out there. And the approach to it was wonderfully simple. You just defy the barrier, plow on through. As I went through life, as will happen with you also, all kinds of funny screwballs will be pitched at you. You won't know where they're coming from, and you're going to have to be imaginative and persistent to get through them. I'll give you some examples of that. When I went to graduate school, they hadn't had a woman in 20 years, and literally they didn't know where to put me. And somehow, the Puritan mind, they thought it was immoral to put me in the study room where the male graduate students had desks, so they put a desk in the hallway. And for a year and a half, I sat at that desk. How did I handle that? Sometimes you just have to tolerate barriers, and I decided that's a barrier I could tolerate. And so I sat there for a year and a half, and I made sure I had the top grades in the graduate program, and eventually they relented and let me have the privilege of sitting in the room with men. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of just letting it pass. A year or so later, my chairman, who was a lovely guy and who actually liked me but couldn't resist harassing me, actually stole my purse. And women have everything in their purse. I had my money, my ID, my driver's license. And I waited till late in the day, and the secretaries knew where it was, and they gave me back my purse. And I went home, and I thought, I can't just pretend this didn't happen. And I can't yell and scream at this man. He's my chairman, and I'll be the bitch. So I did the only logical thing I could think of. I baked brownies. And the next day, I went to my office, and I waited until my chairman was in the hallway, and I saw he was out there, so I took my plate of brownies, and I went out, and I said to him, he said, you know, can I have one of those? And I said, yes, these are all for you. And he looked a little puzzled, and I put the plate out, and he put his hands on it, and I didn't let go. And I said to him very nicely, but very seriously, and don't you ever touch my belongings again. And it worked. That was the end of the harassment. So sometimes you have to speak up. Other times, another example, when I lived in Philadelphia, I was studying gorillas and children and facial expression, having a lovely time, and the only bad thing was I didn't have much money. I was in a poor neighborhood, and when I went out at night, I ran the risk of getting mugged. And after getting mugged 3 times in a little more than 6 months, I said, this is not okay. I am not going to be a prisoner in my apartment. And my solution there was as close as the drawer. I picked up the habit of taking a hammer, a regular claw hammer, if I had to go out in the late afternoon or evening, and I would go where I wanted to go carrying a hammer. And I'll tell you, everybody who was sketchy jumped off the sidewalk and crossed the street. You have to improvise. And the last example I want to give from my professional career was the explanation for why I went to medical school at age 49 with 2 grandchildren already. As all of you know, women's salaries tend to lag behind men. I was tenured at Barnard College at Columbia University. I taught 5 years at Rutgers and 20 at Barnard, 25 years experience, tenured in the sciences at an Ivy League school. And I was making under $30,000 when the men were making 60 and above. At that point, I had tried everything I could think of to address the problem, wasn't successful, so I simply jumped ship and went to medical school at 49, actually had a lot of fun doing it, became a doctor and got paid a doctor's salary. And I wanted to, so sometimes you have to jump ship and take a new tack. And I wanted to end with a story from the period where I was studying gorillas. It's a little off color, so you can cover your ears if it's too off color. I was studying a group of 3 young gorillas, about 3-year-old gorillas, in a cage in the Philadelphia Zoo. And I really wanted to go in that cage and play with them. They were so much fun. And so finally one morning, I was there before the zoo opened, and I got an opportunity. They said, okay, you can go in today. We need somebody to check the electric shocker on the front glass. And you may not know this, but young gorillas love to finger paint. And of course, if you're in a cage, the only thing you have to finger paint with is fecal. And gorillas would go up and paint on the front glass, which kind of grossed out the public. So they electrified the front glass. So my mission was to go in and see if I still got a shock from it. So I was in heaven. I walk in, and the 3 gorillas stopped me dead, one under each armpit and one in the crotch, and sniffed me out, and then they decided I was okay to play with. And the first gorilla, I had a braid that long, the first gorilla starts swinging on my braid, 150 pounds of gorilla, and the second one walks up my front and cuts me around the neck. And now I'm up to 300 pounds of gorilla, and the third one comes onto my back and starts using it as a trampoline, monkey on your back. Now I had 450 pounds of gorilla. I was standing on a cement set of stairs, and I figured I better get down there and lie down. They can't knock me over. So I made my way down the stairs, and I laid down. And the oldest of the male gorillas totally misunderstood why I laid down in front of him. At which point, I become frantic. He's trying to mount me. I'm on my back, and I'm flailing to get him off. My hand hits the glass, and they've opened the zoo. And on the other side of the glass are kindergarten Catholic school children and the nuns trying to get them off. So use your imagination, have fun. If all else fails, improvise. Thank you. Sorry.